Good evening, everyone. I'll call to order the Arvada City Council meeting for November 20th, 2017. Call upon Mayor Pro Tem John Marriott.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please join me in a moment of silent reflection? And now, the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kristen Rush, if you'll do the roll call.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember McGough.
Here.
Councilmember Miller.
Here.
Very good. Welcome, Ms. Miller, to this august group. Next, we have the approval of the minutes of October 16th and 23rd, 2017. Are there any changes or corrections? Seeing none, the minutes will stand approved as presented. Next, we have a proclamation for Small Business Saturday, which Councilmember Mark McGough will present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This recognition, the proclamation, will be presented to members of the Arvada Economic Development Association, Visit Arvada, Arvada Chamber, and Old Town and Arvada Business Improvement District. If those representatives would come to the podium, I'll read the proclamation and bring that to you. As background, let me say the Saturday after Thanksgiving, November 25, 2017, is known as Small Business Saturday. The Arvada Chamber, the Arvada Visitor Center, the Arvada Economic Development Association, and Old Town Arvada Business Improvement District are partnering in a promotion asking people to shop Arvada small businesses this holiday season, highlighting the National Shopping Holiday, November 25, which is referred to as Small Business Saturday. Small businesses create jobs, boost Arvada's economy, and preserve neighborhoods. Each purchase made in Arvada goes to pay for city services such as police, parks, and street maintenance. Keeping dollars in Arvada helps create and retain quality jobs. Small businesses are the nation's largest employers and account for the majority of job growth. Next time you make a purchase, remember, shop Arvada. And let me read the proclamation. Whereas the government of Arvada, Colorado celebrates local small businesses and the contributions they make to the local economy and community. According to the United States Small Business Administration, there are currently 28.8 million small businesses in the United States. They represent 99.7% of all businesses with employees in the United States, are responsible for 63% of net new jobs created over the past 20 years, and whereas small businesses employ over 48% of the employees in the private sector in the United States, and whereas on average 33% of consumers' holiday shopping will be done at small, independently owned retailers and restaurants, and whereas 91% of consumers believe that supporting small, independent-owned restaurants and bars is important, and whereas Arvada, Colorado supports local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our neighborhoods, and whereas advocacy groups, as well as public and private organizations across the country, have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday. Now, therefore, the Mayor and City Council of the City of Arvada, Colorado, do hereby proclaim November 25, 2017 as Small Business Saturday and urge the residents of Arvada to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. This proclamation is dated the 20th day of November, signed by Mayor Mark Williams and all members of council, and I'll bring it, and I guess I'll be presenting it to Jean Gordon. So,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us this evening. I just want to start off by saying what a great city of partners we have. As these executions are scrolling through, you will not only see the Arvada Visitor Center logo, but 4 other organizations. Within a couple of minutes, I basically had those 4 partners to help me with the execution of a true Shop Small campaign that's running the month of November, and a true holiday campaign where we're partnering with 5280 Magazine in Denver for print, social, and online executions. That doesn't happen everywhere. They're helping me execute it and also underwrite, which is all very important. So I just wanted to say it is those partnerships that make this happen. If anybody has any questions, I can talk you through these, but we are having a wonderful event on Saturday the 25th. We invite everyone to come out, 10 a.m. to noon in the square, free breakfast, free lunch. We're gonna have some register to wins there, live music. It should be a nice little kickoff to the holiday shopping season. So again, I can't do it all by myself, and we're here supporting these awesome small businesses in Arvada. And we hope to see you all on Saturday, kick off the holiday season. And I think we have a few people who'd like to say a few words.
Hello, my name is Mary Ruth Tracy, and I've been in business in Arvada for just a little over a year. And from my first interaction with Aida to being in front of you guys today, I have thoroughly enjoyed being a business owner in Arvada, and the growth I've seen with the support of Chamber and Aida and Urban Growth has just been exponential. I hope to see you guys on Saturday at Tracy's Place off of 88th and Wadsworth.
Hi, I'm Nadine Wolf, and I'm one of the owners of Old Town Exchange, a women's consignment shop here in Old Town. We've been in business for a little over 2 years, and this is our 3rd Small Business Saturday that we're having the opportunity to participate in. We're really excited about it. As you know, a lot of small businesses don't have the budget or resources as large companies and businesses have to generate traffic and revenue into their store. So we feel like Small Business Saturday is a place where people can come. As you know, Arvada is becoming a destination spot for family and friends to come and shop and spend their hard-earned dollars. So we hope that they'll come into our store. In turn, that'll increase our sales as well as the tax revenue for the city of Arvada, and also give us an opportunity to develop long-term relationships and lasting customers for the future. That will be a win-win for all of us, I think. So hope to see you in our store.
And where's your location now?
We are right down by the Hilton Hotel now, so in the White Fence Farm, the other half of that building, and right next to Water Tower Flats. So,
Great location.
yeah,
Really nice shop.
It's been
very
wonderful.
impressive.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Nancy Felix. I'm the other owner of Old Town Exchange, and we are an upscale consignment women's boutique. It's been, Nadine and I weren't sure when we started what would happen, and turns out there's a lot of upscale things and people in Arvada, and so it's been a nice win surprise. And we've had a lot of fun. We carry name brands like Coach, Gucci. We've had Louis Vuitton come in, we do jewelry, and so it's a really nice place for people to come and talk. And then we also send people from the Hilton or who's ever in our store back up into Old Town and encourage them to shop, eat, get ice cream, get beer, hang in the fountains. It's really fun to be part of such a vibrant community, and we really appreciate all the help everybody does to make that happen for us. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Allen, and my wife Nancy and I are the owner-operators of Menchie's Frozen Yogurt, and we're located in the Arvada Marketplace. And we've been open for 2 months now, so we're brand new. And I can't tell you how proud and excited we are to be serving the Arvada community. They've really embraced us. It's a fun place to be. We're going to welcome everybody to come see us on Small Business Saturday, and we hope to be here for a long time. Thanks a lot.
Well, welcome to Arvada. We're thrilled to have you. That's what's happened down at the marketplace is just incredible. The total redo of that is just it's really dynamic.
Can we have a quick picture of Arvada businesses?
Sure.
Why, sure. Where would you like me? Right in the right center. Oh, come on.
Talk about a thorn between some roses.
I appreciate you guys for coming.
Small business is such an important part of what makes Arvada so vibrant and a special, special part of us. And thank you all for what you're doing, how you're all working together to advance Arvada as a great place to come shop and be entertained and see some great, great stuff. Next, we have Arvada's recognition as the National Weather Service Storm Ready Community. Mr. Devon?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to introduce Anessa Jane, our Community Resilience Coordinator, and I think she'll give a little background.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Anessa Janes. I'm the Community Resilience Coordinator here at the City of Arvada. I'm really excited to introduce Greg Hansen from the National Weather Service, located in Boulder, Colorado, and he's here to celebrate our recognition as an official storm-ready community. I'll let Greg say a few words.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Greg Hansen, the Warning Coordination Meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Boulder. It's great to be here tonight. We're here to recognize Arvada for doing a lot of work to become storm ready. And what this program does is acknowledges the work that Anessa and her team have done to enhance communications and the connection between the National Weather Service and the City of Arvada. So there are things like multiple ways to receive weather warnings, multiple ways to talk back to us, to report weather, provide training for spotters and other dispatchers, and just a lot of work that's been done. So it doesn't mean Arvada is storm-proof, but at least we're storm ready. And also as a soon-to-be new resident of Arvada, I'm happy to see my new city become storm ready as well. Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Very good.
And we're going to present it to...
Yeah, we have a storm-ready sign that we can post in the location of our choosing. Is that correct?
Oh, right, yeah. So we'll provide you with a storm-ready sign. You can put it anywhere you want. Hopefully display it somewhere the public can see it and let everyone know that Arvada is a storm-ready community.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's great. I'll take that for you, actually.
Thank you. Okay, next on our agenda is public comment on issues not scheduled on our agenda, and I have Regan Robertson signed up first. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Reagan Robertson, and I serve on the Arvada Festivals Commission. I'm here tonight to formally invite you to the 12th annual Cheers for the Holidays event on Saturday, December 2nd. This year it's going to be at the Stanley Lake Library from 6:30 to 8:30, and we are really excited about it. We still have tickets available. This event is our annual fundraiser, and this year all the proceeds will go to Hope House, which we're really excited about because it's a local charity for Arvada. The event is an evening of wine and beer tasting, as well as some samples that you guys get to have as we all ring in the holiday season. So we formally invite you guys and hope to see you guys there.
Right. And will you have some silent auction items, things of that nature?
They are still working on it. We're still hearing back from a few folks, but hopefully we'll do better than we did last year.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Cindy Kreitzer. Good evening, Ms. Kreitzer.
Good evening, Mayor, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while since I've been up here. I know you don't want questions here to be answered tonight, so somebody will have to get back to me on this, but I do have what I think is a simple question, but I'm not so sure now because of the Wheat Ridge ruling by Judge Enquist. I want to know just who is in charge of urban renewal? Who's the ultimate authority for that entity? And that's, it could be the state, it could be the city, or maybe they're on their own. I don't know, but I would love to hear the answer to that if someone could get back to me on that.
We will do so.
Thank you.
You bet. Next, Julia Morrison.
Hi guys, I'm back
Good
again.
evening.
Your bi-monthly reminder that poor people exist and this is what they look like. Recently I was at a public forum for your land development code, the update to your land development code, and I wanted to give you just one piece of my takeaway, and that is that I think I was the only person in that room that is actually struggling with affordable housing. Everybody else in that room was pretty well off, or that they maybe had a family member that was struggling. There was nobody in that room that had children. I'm on poverty wages as an adult, according to the MIT wage calculator. I should be making $21,000 a year in order to afford to live in Jefferson County. I make significantly less than that, but I'm able to survive because I don't have children. I'm able to survive on only that one job, working a full-time job, because I don't have children, and there was nobody in that room. And the takeaway I got from the man who ran it is that the committee, the advisory committee that was formed, there's going to be nobody on that is actually struggling with affordable housing. And I think it's a bit ridiculous if you're going to have an advisory committee and if you're going to have a public forum trying to learn about affordable housing. I think it's a bit ridiculous that you don't have anybody on that is actually struggling with affordable housing. It's a big issue. As you guys know, you made a declaration the last time I was here that this week is for the hungry and the homeless, and yet there's still no real action that's being taken for that. So if you really believe that, if you really believe that we need to take care of the hungry and the homeless, I'd like to see immediate action on that, because it's a problem, and it's been a problem for a long time.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to address City Council during public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment portion of that section of the meeting, move on to some new business. We have several items on the consent agenda. The first is R-17-123, which is a resolution authorizing a construction contract between Arvada and Diamond Contracting Corporation in the approximate amount of $1,260,000 for 2017 miscellaneous drainage projects. Next is R-17-124, a resolution authorizing a construction contract between Arvada and Anarand Constructors in the amount of approximately $133,000 for 2017 guardrail construction and replacement. Third item is a resolution authorizing a grant agreement between Arvada and the State Historical Fund in the amount of approximately $277,000 for the restoration of the Denver Tramway streetcar number .04. And the final one on the consent agenda is a resolution accepting a pedestrian access easement from Jefferson County School District R1 within Candelas, filing number 4, amendment number 1. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Nancy Ford.
I move that the consent items number R-17-123 through R-17-126, where is it? Be approved.
Okay, motions for approval of the consent agenda. All votes are cast. That passes 7-0. Thank you. Next, we have a resolution, R-17-127, which is a resolution approving a First Amendment to a development incentive agreement by and between the City of Arvada and Dillon Companies, Inc., a Kansas City corporation doing business as King Soopers. Mr. Devon?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, before you tonight is this amendment to the development incentive agreement. Just to review, when you approved the original development incentive agreement, the incentive amount was $3 million. Of this amount, 2.8 is a sales tax share back to King Soopers for the purposes of opening the store in Candelas no later than April 2nd, 2018. The incentive will be no longer than 8 years from the opening date. The remaining $200,000 is being used to help bury electrical utility lines within the parcel along Indiana Street. The amendment that's before you tonight modifies the following terms. The store the King Superstore in Candelas will be open no later than July 2nd, 2018. The incentive payback period is modified from 8 years to 7 years, 9 months. All other items of the original agreement remain the same. This amendment is necessary because of the fact that King Soopers encountered some unforeseen construction-related issues that have delayed the construction timetable. These issues include site grading, gas and electric utility connections, access to asphalt materials in order to complete their parking lot. The store, as you well know, is a catalyst for generating new revenue. It's also something that has been expressed as something that's requested by a number of the residents in the northwest area of the city. By this incentive agreement, the store is able to be constructed and operating in 2018 as opposed to the planned development, which would be sometime after 2020. Staff recommends approval of the resolution. If council members have any questions or anything that they'd like to address to the proponents of the incentive agreement, we have representatives from both Candelas and King Soopers present at the meeting, as well as Economic Development Director Ryan Stachelski. And so if you have any questions, we're happy to answer.
Okay, I'll open it up for council question or action. Mr. Jones?
I do have a question, I guess for the developer. So obviously construction is uncertain in a lot of cases because of a number of different reasons. What leads you to believe that July 2nd is really a real date and that there won't be another ask for another amendment to push this back further and further?
If you'll state your name for the record.
My name's Randall Wright. I am the Western Region Real Estate Director for King Soopers. To answer your question, we feel pretty confident at this point. We've actually requested a July 2nd opening. We feel like we are going to beat that opening. We did not want to come back to council a second time and request an extension on it, so we were trying to be very conservative. We feel like we're far enough along in our construction process now that we're confident that we'll be able to achieve that goal.
Okay, I appreciate that. And again, I know that construction is construction, but this is something that the northwest side of Arvada is eagerly awaiting and excited for. And so we want to make sure that we don't disappoint with another delay and another delay.
We're equally as excited to get it open. We've got a lot invested in it, and we've been under an accelerated program for quite some time now, trying to achieve that original goal. So we have every incentive and look forward to opening the store on time.
Thank you. And I'll make a motion if there's no other.
There are no other lights on. You may make the motion.
I move that R17-127, a resolution approving the First Amendment to a Development Incentive Agreement by and between the City of Arvada and Dillon Companies, Inc., a Kansas corporation, DBA King Soopers, be approved.
Motions for approval. I'm going to be supporting this. A couple things that I think we need to make abundantly clear. We're not writing a check to King Soopers for $2.8 million. This is the sales tax that is generated by that new store. A portion of that is going to be rebated back to King Soopers. So we're not fronting money on this whatsoever. This is being paid for from the sales taxes that are being generated at that site. The other thing that I think is important for people to know about this is that, frankly, King Soopers has dramatically slowed down its future expansions. And had we not done this transaction in the manner in which we did it, we might not have gotten a King Soopers up there by 2020, if at all. And our citizens have made it abundantly clear that we need to have that retail anchor up there, and part of the beauty of it is that having the King Soopers there will attract other types of businesses up to that center, and I know that area is really asking for those types of services up in that area. And frankly, those of us who shop the King Soopers at 64th and McIntyre would love to have a few of you shop at a different store. So with that, all votes are cast, and that passes 6-1 with Nancy Ford voting no. Very good, thank you. Next we have the third quarter financial presentation. Mr. Archer. Mr. Archer, I do not expect to hear anything from you tonight about CSU being bowl eligible and CU not. I'll just.
First, I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate Councilmember Marriott and Councilmember Ford for their reelection and Councilmember Miller for her election. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk a little bit tonight about the third quarter finance for the city. Hopefully you all received the printed document. After tonight's presentation, this will be available online. So fortunately, I have been somewhat of a broken record over the last 4 years, but revenues continue to be up and they continue to be positive. We'll talk a little bit about why. City staff has done a wonderful job keeping expenditures in line and within our budget. Growth does continue, but it has started to slow, and I will identify a couple of areas. And we will be coming to City Council asking for an additional appropriation in the month of December, predominantly to clean up items that you have already approved. As with each of our presentations, we do want to highlight a few performance areas. This is small, so I apologize for that. The first area represents our fund balance goal that was established by City Council in 2015. As you can see, we're well above our 17% reserve. This does fluctuate throughout the year. We are sitting above our reserve because currently all of the one-time revenues we have taken in 2017 are still sitting in the fund balance. We will be coming to City Council after the close of the books, sometime in February or March, asking you on how to spend those dollars. The second area we'd like to highlight tonight is related to our fleet and the good work that they're doing towards an alternative fuel source. They started this goal a little over 4 years ago, trying to reach 60% of our overall fleet. And as you can see, we're almost to 55% by the end of 2017. I think we will reach our goal in 2019. Down in the left-hand corner is the number of emergency calls received by the various different sectors for police services. And as you can see, this does go up and down, but if we were to draw a line from the quarter one 2014 to where we are today, this has gone up each and every year. We've been lucky enough to talk about some of the new businesses that have come to the city just a little while ago. As you can see, one of the measures that we have are new business prospects. Our goal is 75 in a year's time, or about 6 per month, and we've exceeded that every single month except in September of this year. This shows that Arvada is a hot market, and small businesses and large businesses alike want to come here. Finally, I want to point out a council strategic goal related to sidewalk gaps. These gaps have been identified by our Transportation Committee and staff, but as it sits today, we have not been able to put additional funding. We are working with developers in the areas where these gaps have been identified to close those if at all possible, and we will be working over the next few months to see if we can't identify additional dollars to help close some of these smaller gaps. As we move to the general fund, we see that everything is green. We will talk further about sales tax, building revenues, and interest revenue, but I'd like to point out that auto use tax, while new vehicle sales are slowing down, auto use tax continues to rise. We talked a little bit about this in the second quarter presentation. This is solely related to the fixing of vehicles from our hailstorm back in May. So we currently sit at about 23% growth year over year. We did not expect that and do not expect that moving forward once the amount of inventory has been repaired. Again, unless we receive another hailstorm next summer. All other areas are positive. Dive in a little bit on sales tax. Year over year, we're seeing a 6.1% growth. We had expected a 4% growth. The growth is widespread in many categories, being led predominantly by fast casual restaurants and retail hardware, both experiencing double-digit growth. You will see 2 lights up there, one under grocery chain and one with the telephone equipment. Grocery chain is in a monitor status. It is growing. Year over year growth is at 1.7%. but that's below our budget of 3. So we're going to keep our eye on that. And then the telephone equipment service line is negative, our only negative category, down 2% for the year.
Mayor, can I ask a question?
Yes.
With the grocery chain stores, are you just monitoring the brick and mortar chain? Because I know like Amazon delivers as well. So does
yes.
that get mixed into that number, or is that keeping it separate?
It's separate. Those are only brick and mortar stores as they sit now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Brian, I just want to ask you, in terms of the sales tax on, you mentioned in the report that the health and specialty foods also was not up, and I wanted to ask if that was related along with the grocery chains.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. It's one of our smaller categories, but one that we try to keep track of, but you're exactly right, Councilmember Ford. Let's talk a little bit about building revenue. Certainly an area of growth for us. Year over year, we're up 6.9%, but I'd like to highlight the slide a little bit. As you see, in 2017, we have less single-family detached permits for the first time in 4 years. While that number, 414, is still greater than many of the years that we had prior to 2013, it is less than 2016. The next question would be, why do we have additional revenue? We did not raise our fees. The additional revenue, again, is related to hail and our roofs. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on this slide. As you can see, we usually bump along around 100 to 150 permits, roofing permits each month. And you see 2 spikes, one in 2017, one in 2014. Both of them, again, related to hail. And so with that increase, we've seen increased need for staff, increased need for contractors, and also an increase in revenue. As we take a look at some of our other funds, we have just a few monitor lights, one on capital projects, monitor light on the expenditures. Again, like everybody else, we're having to compete for contractors and compete for supplies, driving a few of our projects up in costs. City Council is well aware of that, as we've had to come back to you many times for additional appropriations. Staff is doing a wonderful job keeping their eye on this and trying to control this the best they can. We do see 3 monitor lights on the golf fund. We have been talking about this throughout the summer. I would like to go in a little bit more depth on what we are seeing. Lake Arbor had a good year. Rounds were up 5%. Westwood's, not such a good year. They did operate as an 18-hole golf course the entire year. They were not expecting that. They were hoping to be able to operate half the year as an 18-hole course, half the year as a 27-hole course. Due to the construction and some of the delays related to the irrigation replacement, that did not come to fruition. So they were basically down 33% of their inventory of rounds. Ultimately, it played out to about a 25% reduction in play. So that will lead to a reduction, obviously, in revenue. On the expenditure side, they cut what they could. You can't stop keeping the golf course up. You can't stop mowing. You can't stop putting water down. So they cut what they could. They let a lot of temporary staff go, but they will most likely need additional appropriations at the end of the year. We're still working that out. If it stays sunny the rest of the year, that appropriation is going to be smaller. We know that's not going to happen. On the hospitality side, we put a monitor light on 2 things, one on their revenue and one on their year-to-date. This is actually a good story. If you remember at the beginning of the year, they gave up concessions to the arts. That was approximately $115,000 to them in revenues. That was in their budget throughout the year. They did not revise their budget. They did not meet that additional goal, but they are up over last year. So we just wanted to identify that and point that out to City Council. Finally, we've been talking about risk management. They are seeing a dramatic increase in their workers' comp expenditures. That is why we put the warning light up there. We will be coming to City Council in December to ask for additional appropriation to cover some of these expenditures. The 4th quarter has turned and we've gotten much better. So the majority of this came in the first 3 quarters of the year. And we put a monitor on the year-to-date because they will be using fund balance this year to offset those increases in expenditures. A quick look at our investments. If you remember 1 year ago today, well, not today, but pretty close to today, we went out and hired a third-party firm to help us with our long-term duration portfolio. You can see that we've achieved about a 3 basis point increase. Not a great return, but we're hoping that as the years go on, that we will see a greater growth there. If you roll the clock back 3 years ago, we were getting 0.6 on our investments. 2 years ago, 0.75, last year 0.92. You can see we're at 1.23. A lot of that has to do with the Fed raising short-term funds rate. That's happened 2 times this year. And currently, 91% likely that it's going to happen again in December. The market has already adjusted for that, and if it did not happen, it would be a negative. You can also see that we've had an increase in the purchase of U.S. Treasuries, and that is solely related to PFM, our third-party investor. So in summary, building activity is still strong, but it has slowed. We still face the same infrastructure needs that we've faced before. We were able to put additional funds to our street maintenance, and they did get those funds spent. A little over $10.2 million this year, probably about $10.6 when we're done. That's quite impressive. We are working on creating our fiber infrastructure, and we will be coming back to City Council in February to talk about how we can strategically use these one-time funds that we have received. Any questions I could answer?
Mr. McGough.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering in general, Mr. Archer, when we use the terms warning and monitor, what are the trigger figures, or when do we get to monitor and when do we get to the warning? At what point?
Partially, it's when the finance department sees something irregular. If you want to get more specific on the revenue side, it's when we're below our budget.
Just anything below the projected budget for the year
on the revenue side
will result in a warning on the revenue side.
Correct.
And then on the expenditure side?
If we're ahead of what we should have spent for the year at that point.
So at any amount?
Correct.
Does that mean any amount with no expectation that it will improve for the rest of the year?
Correct.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
Nancy Ford.
Just a quick question on under the general fund where it says the 2017 budget requires approximately 12 million to balance. What does that mean?
So that's the use of our fund balance, and those items were directly related to one-time items that City Council approved in April. So our budget was basically balanced, approximately about $500,000. And then we took a bunch of what was in the fund balance and put it towards capital projects. That is what that means.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if this is more for you or Mr. Devon. The concern with workers' comp claims, do we have a good system in place in terms of training, things of that nature? And I don't know what kind of specific workers' comp type claims we're having, other than stress created by City Council on staff. But other than that, what are we looking at?
Somebody might take it seriously.
We look at the workers' comp claims both on a case-by-case basis and in the aggregate. And I don't know that we have a specific, magic bullet or whatever that we can offer. I think part of this is symptomatic in a aging workforce, and we do have an aging workforce in certain areas. So it's partially as a result of that, probably primarily as a result of that. And I think also, we continue to push wellness programs and our access to health insurance, or access to primary care physicians, and people getting physicals and taking care of chronic kinds of issues that they might have. So we continue to push that, but I think part of this is associated with having an aging workforce.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Mr. Archer, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck to the Rams. Next, it's time for some public hearings. I open public hearing on R-17-128, a resolution setting forth certain findings of fact and conclusions as to the annexation of certain land into the City of Arvada, Colorado, Begg Industrial, 4927 Allison Street. At the same time, we'll consider Council Bill 17035, an ordinance annexing certain land into the City of Arvada, Begg Industrial, 4927 Allison Street, and Council Bill 17036, an ordinance rezoning, I'm sorry, just the first two. Nope, I'm sorry. I was right the first time. An ordinance rezoning certain land within the City of Arvada, Begg Industrial, from Jefferson County C1 Commercial to City of Arvada I1 Light Industrial, and amending the official zoning maps of the City of Arvada, Colorado, 4927 Allison Street. Mr. Devon?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Director of Community Development Rita McConnell will introduce these items.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. This proposal will facilitate the development of a light industrial warehouse structure. Excuse me, slow start tonight. A conceptual site plan has been submitted with the application. Please keep in mind a conceptual site plan is only required with a straight zoning such as this. The official site plan is subject to administrative review and approval, and that will happen later. This proposal complies with the Land Development Code as required for the particular conceptual site plan at this time. Again, we'll apply the Land Development Code standards for the official application later. The comprehensive plan goals for annexation and industrial development is also in compliance with. The Planning Commission voted 5 in favor of this request with 2 members absent. I have received the affidavit of mailing and posting log, and they are in order. Will Tucker, senior planner, or no, he's not getting promoted yet. Planner 2, hey, hold off on that a little bit. Planner 2, we usually have our senior planners here, is in attendance for any staff-related questions, and the applicant will be doing a short presentation, and he will come up at this time.
Very good. The affidavit of mailing and posting log will be made part of the record. Anyone who wishes to testify in these proceedings, if you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Very good.
My name is Craig Romery, principal of Romery Architects. I am also the applicant for the owner, Allison LLC, which is owned by Mr. Kelly Begg. I think it was about 7 or 8 months ago, might have been even longer than that. Mr. Begg purchased a small piece of property that is out of the auspices of the City of Arvada in unincorporated Jefferson County. It is a small, approximately, I can't remember, quarter to a half acre, and it is surrounded on 3 sides by the City of Arvada, a little island unto itself. And we submitted the preliminary annexation and rezoning documents, et cetera. We're at the, I believe it was the September 5th planning and zoning hearing, at which time I do want to thank officially again Mr. Tucker for all of his help. And it is a annexation and rezone for a light industrial piece of property. It is going to be approximately a 6,000 square foot main floor building, 3 2,000 square foot rental bay units with office and slight warehouse. And I think the total will be approximately 7,500 because there are going to be 3 small mezzanine portions for additional storage for the 3 tenants. Mr. Begg is actually planning on being owner-occupier of one of those particular units. I really don't have a whole lot. The Planning Commission did a very, very nice job of doing this property and doing this project. And again, we're set forward. It's the next one. Hit the button. Read the slide here. Again, we will be submitting a full site plan for approval. These are some very conceptual elevations for the building. There are industrial on both the north and the west. And of course, the street, Allison Street, is on the east of the property, and there is industrial across the street. And we would certainly like to think that I will put in my prejudiced opinion that it will be maybe the best looking building on the south side of Allison Street. And again, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Very good. Is there anyone else that would like to present testimony on this issue? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment portion, open it up for City Council questions or action. Mr. Marriott?
If there are no questions, I'd like to make a motion.
I see no questions.
Okay.
You may proceed.
So I move that R 17-128, a resolution setting forth certain findings of fact and conclusions as to the annexation of certain land into the City of Arvada, Colorado, Beg Industrial, 4927 Allison Street, be adopted.
Okay, that's the resolution for the findings of fact indicating that it's eligible for annexation. That passes 7-0.
Okay. Next, I move that Council Bill 17-035, an ordinance annexing certain land into the City of Arvada, Beg Industrial, 4927 Allison Street, be approved subject to the attached conditions of approval on final reading, numbered 4613, and ordered published by title only. This motion is based on the findings of fact adopted by the Planning Commission.
This is the ordinance annexing the property. All votes are cast. That passes 7-0. Thank you.
Okay, and give me 1 second here. Having a little bit of technical problems today, but I'm going to get it. Give me a copy of that. My thing's blank. Sorry. I need.
Oh, you want the actual?
Yeah, my thing just went blank. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, my iPad just lost its mind. So I move that Council Bill 17-036, an ordinance rezoning certain land within the City of Arvada, Beg Industrial, from Jefferson County C1 Commercial to City of Arvada I1 Light Industrial, and amending the official zoning maps of the City of Arvada, Colorado, 4927 Allison Street, be approved on final reading, numbered 4614, and ordered published by title only. This motion is based on findings of fact adopted by the Planning Commission.
Okay, this is the rezoning. All votes are cast. That passes 7-0. Very good. Congratulations.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and members of council. We hope to have a building under construction probably by March or April, if we can get the site plan completed in time, but early next spring. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Let's do a quick stand in place. Okay, we'll reconvene at this time. I'll open the public hearing on Council Bill 17037, an ordinance adopting the design guidelines for the Reno Park Edition Historical District. Mr. Devon?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we'll have Director of Community Development Rita McConnell lead off with this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. The design guidelines before you this evening is the culmination of a project that had its inception with the rezoning of Reno Park in 2015 and as a result of the neighborhood petition brought before council in 2014. This rezoning effort was the first step by Reno Park residents to preserve the character of the historic neighborhood. Zoning does have its limitations on preserving this character, however. The design guidelines are intended to deal with those aspects of historic character that the community deems especially important to protect and that are not addressed in zoning. The design guidelines have been developed and vetted through an extensive public process, including 3 council workshops, 4 community meetings, and 2 surveys. Legal notice was provided by publication, and courtesy notice was also provided to over 400 persons. We now present the Reno Park Design Guidelines for public hearing with a staff recommendation for approval. Cheryl Drake, Senior Planner, and she is a Senior Planner, will initiate the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I'm going to provide, don't tell me I did this. Next slide. There we go. I'm going to provide a little background information, and then I'm going to turn it over to our consultant to get into the meat of the document. The project area is basically between Ralston Road and Grandview Avenue, Yukon over to Zephyr Street. It is the Reno Park Addition National Historic District. We are not including that portion of the historic district which is along the west side of Yukon Street, because that has Old Town zoning and is covered by the Old Town design guidelines. The first community meeting and online survey were designed to gather input from the community on valued qualities of the area and to identify issues. In the survey, the most important qualities that were identified were the location to Old Town Arvada, walkable streets and blocks, historic character, trees, and porches. 80% of those who took the survey indicated that the historic district enhances the culture of value in the community. 67% indicated that the district should retain its historic fabric. 67% indicated that it's important that the district retain its designation on the National Register of Historic Places. 53% indicated that rehabilitation and additions to existing structures were more beneficial than new construction, and 45% felt that recent new construction had been too large. At the second community meeting and the joint workshop that we had with City Council Planning Commission and the Design Review Committee, we reviewed a draft of the design guidelines and began to talk about implementation. This was followed by a second online survey specifically targeted at implementation, and the responses were as follows. 48% of the respondents desired a regulated district, 33% an advocacy program, and the remaining 19% were divided on an advisory approach, an incentive-based approach, or had no opinion. We then followed that up with a third community meeting to discuss specifically implementation of the guidelines. Because of the mixed response that we'd gotten on the survey, staff proposed a combination of mandatory and advisory design guidelines as the approach, where the mandatory guidelines would focus on those major topics, and the advisory guidelines would be best practices in historic preservation. There was general consensus for this approach, with a request for clarity on some of those priority design guidelines. At the final community meeting, additional clarification was presented on these priority design guidelines. The community was still divided on guidelines primarily focused on appropriate treatment of porches, appropriate location for two-story additions, and new construction, and the appropriate massing of dormers, as well as demolition. We then proceeded to City Council to workshop for some direction, and we reviewed this approach with mandatory and priority guidelines. Council was in agreement with the majority of the mandatory guidelines, but further discussion was needed on guidelines dealing with the appropriate location for two-story construction and dormer massing. We then put together some additional information and modeling for council and came back with a workshop in October and presented those models on those 3 remaining issues. Staff received direction from the majority of council to proceed with the guidelines, which provided for some limits on the location of two-story construction and the dormer massing. So this time I'd like to turn it over to our consultant, Nori Winter from Winter & Company, and he's going to walk us through the document.
I think I got it. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Winter.
As Cheryl has indicated, the document combines an extensive number of advisory guidelines that represent best practices in terms of historic preservation and compatible design in traditional neighborhoods, with a limited number of mandatory guidelines that are aimed at some of the key variables that residents express the greatest concern about. In the document now, in the revised version based on your direction, you will see that those that are mandatory are highlighted in red typeface to make it easier to see them. So I'm going to walk through the whole document to provide an overview of it, but again, very briefly. But you will see that difference in color in the fonts along the way. The advisory guidelines are there for property owners who seek to have advice, particularly with respect to how they might treat an historic property, but they also do provide some other guidance about finer-grained considerations for new construction. This is the list of the mandatory guidelines, and they are grouped into basically 4 categories. One is to preserve and respect the neighborhood character of a property, which is an overarching preservation guideline. There are then 3 that focus specifically on historic resources, and that has to do with maintaining the general historic character and in particular treating historic porches so that they still read as an open air element, even though they might be enclosed. There are then a couple of mandatory guidelines that relate to the positioning of a building or an addition on the site, and then 5 that relate to new construction, including accessory structures. The district, as Cheryl pointed out, is one that includes those that are contributing and non-contributing buildings. Those are based on the survey that identified the eligibility for the National Register originally. And this map indicates those that are non-contributing structures and those that are contributing. And preservation of those that are contributors is a key objective. The guidelines themselves are organized into a series of sections such that a property owner would only need to use the sections that are relevant to their project. If they're dealing with an historic building, the guidelines that provide advice about that are in a couple of sections. If they are indeed considering new construction, there are a couple of locations for a couple of chapters related to that. And then there are appendices that provide some supplementary information, some considerations about demolition, for example, and also some specific discussions of historic styles and a glossary of terms. To help users navigate the document, there's a chart that indicates which chapters apply to a particular kind of improvement project. And that, while the document itself is over 100 some odd pages long, the reality is that for many projects, you would only be using a small portion of the document. The guidelines draw upon the characteristics that participants in the workshops identified as being important. And part of those are measurable and others are more qualitative. There's a section that identifies those traditional design characteristics that people are encouraged to respect and consider, and on which some of the mandatory guidelines are based. You will recall that we've discussed height as a particular variable, and as a vocabulary, there's an explanation of what constitutes a 1-story, a 1.5-story, or a 2-story building. Many of the properties, as you'll see in the photos in the document, indicate that the vast majority of structures are 1 and 1.5-story buildings, but there are some 2-story structures, and those are identified. Chapter 1, which does focus on preservation, provides some of the broader principles and philosophical approaches to historic preservation, and discusses how you might plan an approach to a project depending on the significance of your property and its condition. It also addresses considerations of context, of considering where contributing buildings may sit with respect to your property, and this could affect the standards, the mandatory guidelines for building height within the front setback area. The second chapter gets more specific about historic buildings and provides specific guidelines related to treatment of materials and preservation of important features, ornamental detail, materials, etc. Also provides guidelines about additions, appropriate locations and proportions for additions, and other special considerations related to accessibility and adaptive reuse. It also helps to identify those features that are considered key to the historic integrity of a building to promote their preservation. So users can better understand those elements that they should pay particular attention to. One particular section does address porches, and there is a mandatory guideline there related to keeping an open feel, even though a porch might be enclosed, but using transparent means to do so. There also are additional guidelines about the proportion and roofing over of more modest stoops. The section on additions provides some guidance about proportions in respect to the original building height and appropriate locations for different types of additions, particularly those that are located to the rear where they have less of an impact from the view from the street. There also are special considerations for energy conservation and generation and guidance about best places, best practices for retrofitting historic buildings for energy conservation and potential location of solar collectors and other devices that might help with sustainability. The third chapter is one that has some material that could apply to either a historic renovation project or a new construction. Some of those have to do with site design, guidance about alleys, and fence designs, for example, location of parking, site lighting. And some of these include some mandatory guidelines about appropriate alignment of a building front for new construction to be respectful of the context of the contributing buildings that are nearby. The guidelines for all projects also provide some specific suggestions, such as those for exterior lighting on buildings. The fourth chapter provides guidelines for new construction. These include discussion of architectural character, encouraging creativity, implying that you're not expected to create an historic style to fit within an historic district, but to be compatible in mass and scale and orientation, but that contemporary designs are certainly welcomed. But there are other guidelines that relate to the orientation, recommended materials, porch design, doors, etc., and guidelines for accessory buildings. In this section, there are some mandatory guidelines related to building proportions, such that a larger building, although it may be larger than those seen traditionally, is divided more into modules or segments that reflect the traditional character of the area. And so there are illustrations here about how to articulate the mass of a new building such that it, from the street, will appear to be in scale with their historic neighbors. There also are guidelines about the location and proportion of porches for new buildings within this section. And there's guidance about the location and scale and proportion of accessory structures, particularly thinking in terms of garages, but certainly other kinds of secondary buildings as well. And again, asking that these be located such that they're subordinate to the main building, remaining well set back from the street, and in many cases accessed from alleys. That is a brief overview of the contents of the guidelines. We wanted to remind Council that there's a lot of material in here that will be useful to property owners who are planning their projects, in addition to those that will be administered as mandatory guidelines. With that, I'll turn it back over to Cheryl for just an explanation of what the next steps are.
So tonight, should council decide to adopt the design guidelines, staff would then move forward with amendments to the Land Development Code to talk about the things that we've talked about, being an administrative review, putting in place the review process, any waiver language and that sort of thing, just basically to clean everything up. We anticipate being at Planning Commission December 5th and then City Council February 5th. And with that, we are available for any questions and discussion after you take some public comment.
Very good. This time I will consider public comment. I've got several people who have signed up. I'll begin with Chip. Weirsick? Weinsick. Sorry, I couldn't tell if it was an N or an R, and I guessed wrong. Good evening, sir.
Great, thank you. Good evening. I'm Chip Weinsack. We own the house at 5705 Zephyr, which is in the Reno Park district. We bought this house in September of 2015, just to give you a little bit of history. We bought this house. We're in Louisville, Colorado. That's where I live with my wife and my two kids. I also have an architectural firm there in Louisville. And if anybody knows Louisville, they've done a lot of the same things you guys are doing here with your town, which we've really liked. The one thing that we have missed in Louisville is the train. We've been waiting for the train up there in Louisville, and it isn't going to come by the time I'm in this world, maybe my kids, but you guys have a train here, and we really like that connection. That's what drove us down here to Arvada, and particularly the Reno Park area, searching for a property that we could buy. The property that came up, it was owned by the Knight family. I don't know if any of you know the Knights. They've been around here for a long, long time. Blanche Knight and her son, Michael Knight. And there's also Matt Knight, if that name rings a bell, is the city engineer here, lived in that house. So there's a long history of that house with the Knight family. We bought it. We were going to renovate it and move into it. And this was September of 2015. We didn't know anything at all about the guidelines or what was going on in place. We've learned about it since, so we've held off doing anything with our property, sort of till this process goes through. We've done some minor renovations to our property. Electrical service was really bad at that house. Egress window down in the lower level. Some structural work that we had to do on the house, and we took care of all that. And we currently have it rented to two brothers who are native Arvadians that are back here living close to their family where they grew up. So it's been sort of an interesting circle of things that have gone on. But we learned about the historical park and the guidelines, and was quite excited about that. Being an architect and knowing of Winter and Company, they have always done what I consider very high quality projects. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about values going down because of size of homes. Well, I got to tell you, in the architectural work that I do, I see the exact opposite. The values are going up for the smaller quality homes in these historical areas. And I think that's something that these guidelines can preserve for this community and for this particular part of Arvada, which is only a 4-block area of Arvada. And I know I've gotten to know of the time that we've been here and we've been renovating the house. A lot of the community members and people have come up and expressed their like, their dislike, whatever it may be about the guidelines and the process that we've gone through. And we've also gotten to know Cheryl and Rita, starting to talk about some of the stuff that we might want to do at our house and how we go about doing that. And last time I was here, there was a straw vote that was done, and we really liked the direction that was headed for trying to keep the historical guidelines and the guidelines that are in place today. We really think that is a great direction to go with these, and I highly support those guidelines here. And also, too, I think the whole process of having staff be able to provide guidance, direction, and some flexibility with the guidelines as we go through these processes, because I think, as you all know, at least I have in my 30-year career in architecture, nothing ever stays the same, and the only thing that you really know that's really going to happen is change. You know that's going to happen, it's going to continue to happen. So just seeing this whole process go on as a owner in Reno Park, as an architect in Colorado for 30 years, I think you've got some of the best that could possibly happen within this 4-block area, and I highly support the guidelines and the work that Rita and Cheryl, Winter and Company, and the community has done here, and that's what I'd like to say tonight. So I hope that we can get that achieved tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I'll call on Nick Stewart.
Good evening, Council, and Doc, congratulations on your recent nomination. I live at 7799 West 57th. I didn't plan to speak tonight. I don't really have much of a prerogative, short of when I look at the map, there's two properties, mine being one of them. There's 8 properties my large, and as large as mine in this subdivision, and my frontage faces south toward that Cornerstone Church right across the street, or maybe they've changed their name since. The frustrating part, I guess, for me is like I'm a mortgage banker, so guidelines to me are everything. My boss is the federal government, so don't look in the wrong direction or dot an HOA wrong on a disclosure. But when I look at them, what's frustrating is it really doesn't fit the character of how my property could be, I guess, added to without potentially scraping my particular lot. So the frustrating part, I guess, for me, without even going upstream in some of my notes, is it would be extremely weird when I read the guidelines like I read mortgage guidelines. I read these design guidelines and go, Mr. Richter, my neighbor to the north, would hate it if I did what some neighbors have done and built all the way to my setback on the fence to make an addition for my family because of how my ridgeline faces. So my hope and my ask is that regardless of what happens with this vote, or what goes into place, that there can be, I guess, considerations for properties that it doesn't make sense to actually build that direction, or it doesn't make sense to do this. It doesn't make sense that I could only replace a 3-foot by 3-foot stoop and I can't have a porch for my family to sit out and meet my neighbors. To me, the biggest problem I think we have in society, and I always want to strip it down to community, is neighbors aren't talking to neighbors, and neighbors aren't loving neighbors, and neighbors aren't getting over their issues with neighbors. Back in the day, if you needed to raise a barn, your neighbors from all over that weren't your neighbors, they were your fellow farmers came and helped you raise the barn. If they had a problem with what you're doing, they would have said it. And we don't live in a society like that anymore. And what I don't want to see happen to Old Town Arvada is these guidelines put a burden on people that could potentially make a nice home for their family or make an addition on their lot to bring in more economic development. Do we want, I guess, the damage is really done for me is the way I look at it. But I mean, we've forgot about this for how long? And then what did it take to get to it? One property being built, a structure here, someone upset here, good for the multifamily zoning that got changed. But I mean, are we tit for tat? Are we going to continue to let the crappy properties that are looking terrible in our neighborhood continue to deteriorate? Because I think it becomes exponentially harder to bring in the dollars to rehab those properties when guidelines are such that it becomes very complicated, whether you have means or you don't have means to do it. Values could be depressed because of that. Maybe they're increased because of it. My 2 cents is I just hope you work with people, because my wife and I are people that, she comes from Congress Park, Denver, and I've seen what San Francisco did. We like to maintain the integrity of our neighborhood. I want to keep my original A-frame there, but my original A-frame has vinyl siding on it that's beat up because of hail. So I'm in a limbo going, I don't know if I want to redo the vinyl siding because I'd like to bring it back to the 4-inch lap. But before they tell me I could build the way that's natural for us to build here, then we'll do whatever and we'll rent it out, unfortunately, and have to leave and buy elsewhere because we want more children. So thank you for letting me come and speak. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, sir.
Can we get his address one more time?
Yes, his address is 7799 West 57th Avenue. Next, Robert Becker.
Hi, good evening. My name is Robert Becker. I have 2 properties in the district, 5712 Yarrow and 5708. One I live in and one I rent. Going back, way back in the beginning of this whole process, they mentioned a couple of surveys that were done. And from where I sit, roughly 50% of the people that took those surveys didn't want any sort of mandatory guidelines whatsoever. I'm all for the advisory ones. I think they're fine, but the mandatory ones I think are kind of harsh in certain circumstances, and I think there's a lot of people in this community that really don't want the mandatory ones. That's kind of where I stand.
Thanks for your input. Next, we have Patrick, is it McRump? McRory. Sorry, sir. It's not quite as bad as mine, so.
Good evening. I recently purchased the property at 5701 Yarrow. It's on the corner of Yarrow and 57th, across the street from Nick. I have 2 young kids and a wife. I've been here speaking before. I don't want to go over things that I've said before, but our daughter's in kindergarten at St. Anne's. We plan to use the train to go downtown to where my office is. I plan to stimulate the community. I plan to go out in Old Town Arvada consistently. I plan to support civic activities. I plan to be what I hope is a long-term member of the community. I wonder whether some of, for instance, the second-story guidelines sitting back not only prohibit families like mine coming to the neighborhood, but maybe more importantly, if you really look at that design, in my humble opinion, and I'm not an architect or an interior designer, it just actually looks more awkward than anything else. I want to make it real clear that I believe strongly what Nick said. If I am a potential home buyer in Old Town Arvada and I see the word mandatory, I have to really study that and figure out whether I can still do what I would like to do. I will tell you this, I am 100% against creating the next Lower Highlands. I think the block architecture, I think the 3 stories, 100% against that. I respect the architectural designs in the neighborhood. As a matter of fact, if you were to see the plans that I've put together, it's a modern farmhouse, and it very much looks like my neighbors' homes. So I would just ask that you consider what some of the second-story guidelines and some of the other, quote, mandatory guidelines will do to future potential purchasers of properties in the neighborhood. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have David Edelstein.
Excellent pronunciation.
Whew.
Excellent. David Edelstein.
1 out of 10. I'm doing pretty good.
You did great. We're at 5702 Zephyr Street. We're in a close to 100-year-old home. And I come from a place in Southern California where that's not heard of. Anything over 5 years old in Southern California gets scraped and a new shopping mall goes up. I came to Colorado and really, it was culture shock for me. And it was something really great that we're looking at our heritage. There's parts of Old Town Arvada that's the way it's looked since probably the turn of the century. And we want to preserve that heritage. I'm not against progress. I'm not in the way of someone creating a home for their family. But like everything else in this world, there are certain restrictions. In the case of Old Town Arvada, it is to preserve that heritage, to preserve that old town feeling. Does it limit someone's square footage of putting up a new home? Sure it does, but that's kind of the gambit you run with moving to the Old Town area. We have smaller lots, it's smaller homes. We kind of want everybody to kind of stay along with some certain guidelines as far as what those homes look like. And the Tennyson, Northwest Denver area with the 3-story ultra modern, it just doesn't belong there. And we would kind of like to preserve that. I'm absolutely foursquare for the mandatory and the advisory guidelines. And I'm also in agreement with my neighbors that we do need to start talking to each other more and kind of communicating so it isn't an us and them environment. It's more of a community, and a community that we all want to kind of preserve. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Kelly Irgo on behalf of Ray and Danelle Sandoval.
Thank you, Council. I am speaking on behalf of Ray and Danelle. They live at 5710 Yarrow Street and are out of the country and unable to be here this evening. And as you know, I've actually been involved as a resident of Old Town Arvada throughout this whole process over the last 4 years. And I can say on behalf of themselves as well as others that we are very much so in favor of these, both the blend of the mandatory and the advisory. A lot of us would actually have preferred everything be mandatory. We feel this is a very good, very pared down compromise that allows for the protection of mass and scale. This letter was mostly written by Ray, so if you hear I in here, you know it's Ray. And for those of you who know Ray, you can imagine him when I say these things. Thank you for allowing us to state our thoughts. We believe what City Council decides with regard to the Reno Park Historic District not only affects individual property owners, but the entire neighborhood and the city of Arvada. Before the National Park Service existed, the Reno Park town site was laid out on November 28, 1870, 147 years ago, almost to the week of this meeting. At that time, the newly established Rocky Mountain News described the town site as a place of rare beauty. The National Park Service has actually declared Reno Park to possess integrity of location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. Additionally, the district is notable for having served historically as a residential neighborhood for middle-class citizens of Arvada, including several leaders in local business, government, and civic affairs. All of us who live in Reno Park today understand it is a privilege to live here. Some have said that they don't necessarily care about the history, and they want to make sure that we don't have three-story flat-roofed houses. We do ask, however, that we recognize, as Councilmember McGough acknowledged, that even that two-story guideline would actually allow for 3 stories. We also ask that we recognize intuitively that we know that these structures that are out of scale and out of scope don't fit what was described earlier. It is the historic core of Arvada, the Reno Park is, and it has intrinsic value that should be preserved and valued as a collection. We've heard some concern about personal property rights. We believe that City Council must consider the property rights of the long-established residents who have worked hard to maintain their historic homes. Currently, more homes have been meticulously preserved than demolished. Light, sound, odor, and the disintegration of historical artifacts do not recognize property lines. I believe the property rights perspective should broaden from a thinking of individual property rights to a larger context of a rare collection that is more valuable than each home by itself. Kind of the proverbial, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Reno Park is an established neighborhood. Tearing down homes and building new will disrupt the current intact collection of historic homes. Doing so without guidelines will destroy it. The 2014 Arvada Comprehensive Plan states, preservation of historic resources is an important value in the community. If Reno Park is not rigorously protected, we are all choosing to ignore its purpose and place in our lives and in our city. If nothing is decided, we are all accepting me, mine, more, homogenation, profit, and McMansions. A group of people decided to preserve historic places like Mesa Verde, Rocky Mountain National Park, the Molly Brown House, Chautauqua, etc. We encourage you to be the group of people who ultimately decide to preserve the origin of Arvada Reno Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, John England.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for the opportunity. I am the homeowner at 5705 Yarrow Street with my wife and family here. We've been in the city 19 years owning that facility, and some of you may have toured it most recently because we have the privilege of owning Fred Vetting's house, who founded the Rocky Mountain, his father founded the Rocky Mountain Seed Company. And so we've been doing our bit to actually grow and enhance the neighborhood and preserve our property, like others can do with these design guidelines. And our addition, if you come see it, fits well within that. So you actually might not notice our facility that has the addition because my wife carefully got brick from Mendoza Brick Company, 64th and Pecos, that matches the fish brick that was original to our 1929 bungalow. So there's 2 bungalows on Yarrow Street. We happen to have one of them. And you'll see that the stucco in the back matches the stucco in the front, and you can very hardly tell because of the mass and scale that we did. And so for me, as a civil engineer licensed in Colorado who works around the world preserving large dams, so those who are fishing, who've been to Glenda Reservoir, you may see the new spillway at Glenda Reservoir I helped design, or some other places like at Blue Mesa or the facilities around the world. And I could talk to you about those other times, but the interesting thing about the preservation of large dams in older homes is very similar if you've been to the Salt River Project in Arizona, where they've enhanced the facility to provide water and power for the city of Phoenix. And we're preserving and updating our houses so that we have a little more space, modern kitchens, maybe another bathroom, fitting within the character and the design of how the community and the place was built. So I'm very much obviously in favor of these design guidelines, being in town for, again, 19 years, working on 20. And growing up in an 1856 farmhouse in Connecticut, where it is actually the facilities on the National Register, you get the sense of, if you don't preserve it now, well, where will we be in 100 years? And what would people go to look to when things get changed? So that's my perspective, and I appreciate your opportunities and the work of the consultants to really enhance, I feel, the community in Old Town, at least in Reno Park. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll call on your wife, Sharon England, who did graciously allow some of us to come into your home.
Yes, it was wonderful to be able to share with you what we have done to preserve the character of our home and the character of the neighborhood. Shall I? I'm a little petite, so.
You're doing fine.
I know. We share something there, Dot. So I would like to say thank you for the process that has been done. I think City Council, city staff, and Winter and Company have done an amazing job at really listening for a very long time to what the community has had to say, and it really looking into how to best go about what do we need to do here, what is desired by the neighborhood, what is desired by the greater community, the greater city of Arvada, and where do we want to go, what do we want to do. And so I appreciate that process. I appreciated the vote that was taken at the last meeting to kind of move forward with looking further into what has been put forward by Winter and Company. It is a great compromise coming from where we started and hearing all of the voices, and I appreciate that compromise. I really appreciated last time the perspective on how people whose homes and lots are different can ask for waivers. And instead of painting with a broad brush of saying, you know, let's make it so that everyone can have this happen, let's paint the broad brush to say preserve, and then if there is a home that needs a waiver, let's look at that. But if we paint with a broad brush to say everybody can do 2 stories or anybody can do this anywhere, then we lose the quality of what we have. And we do have a very special place in Reno Park. And it is possible to do an addition onto these homes, whether it be a 600 square foot home to begin with that turns into a much larger home, or my home was one of the larger homes and now is quite a large home. It is possible to go within these design guidelines to preserve the character of the neighborhood, to preserve the history for our future, and still get what we need for modern living, or what we want, realistically, for modern living. Small homes are making a comeback. They are becoming more and more popular. And this is a 4 square block area. There are very few homes in this neighborhood. If the design guidelines that are mandatory don't fit what you want to do, don't buy in these 4 square blocks. This is a precious part of Arvada's history, and I would encourage people to think about that. If you really need to have a home that does not fit in these design guidelines, you have the option to buy a home somewhere else. Once you have destroyed a home there is no other option. That history can't come back, and you will move on at some point, whether it be to another home or to your final resting place. You will move on, and that house will be gone forever because you decided to scrape that house or whatever. And so I'd like council to think about that and how that affects our future and affects our past. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's the last of the sign-ups I have. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to us on this issue? Yes, if you'll come down and give your name and your address.
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Bruce. I own a property on Yarrow, 5701. I have been full of despair as to what to do with it because I've seen what the city has been doing. Some years ago, I brought up Dresden, a city in Germany that was completely destroyed by the British. I've seen similar things happening here, and I began to lose interest in the city, which is why I'm so pleased that you are doing tonight what you are doing. In the meantime, we've had full destruction, and you're going to do a lot more. 6 stories built along Grandview. What a travesty. What I have seen also happening here, and it's happened right behind our house, is that if somebody uses their garden as a dump and raises the level 7 or 8 feet, then, and we protested to the city, then the next occupier of that property is now building their base 6 or 7 feet higher. What I'm wishing to do, and I will, if the city passes what we're proposing, I will start improving my property. At the present moment, I have no interest. It's going to be, already the house next door has been destroyed. More and more buildings are being destroyed. Absolutely inappropriate, disgusting, terrible places are being built. I'm hoping you will follow what has been proposed. Otherwise, you've lost the city. 6 stories on Grandview, Park Place, what a travesty. What a waste of money that we're putting all these millions into all these projects. I really don't know what to do. If the city passes and starts to decide that we need to preserve these areas, and we've had some very interesting and hopefully listened to points made, if the city follows these, then I will do my part to try to preserve what is already being destroyed. So I do hope you will set some very interesting and good guidelines. I wasn't going to speak tonight. My wife has laryngitis. She was going to make some very profound points, but thank you for listening.
Hey, Jeffrey, I'm sorry, what was your address again?
5703 Grandview,
Okay.
Yarrow. I live at 6703 Grandview.
I thought you might have lived with Patrick.
Say again?
I thought you might have lived with Patrick.
Please
because,
repeat, sorry?
Patrick's 5701, and you said you're at 5701. I just needed clarity
I'm
on your
at
address.
570. Well, I own a property at 5703.
Okay.
I've seen the street just degraded. I live at 6703, and we have a monstrosity being built behind us on elevated ground. And if this is the new thing in Arvada, well, to hell with it.
And that's behind 5703.
5703 Yarrow is where I own a property. I live at 6703. We kept on Grandview.
Oh, okay.
We kept protesting to the city about the ground being used as a dump, and the reply was nothing we can do about it. So if anybody wants to build a skyscraper, a 3-story building in this town, just make sure you put 20 or 30 feet of dump in your garden.
Where do you own 5703 Yarrow Street?
Yeah.
As a rental?
Yeah, you're next door.
Okay, thank you. Somebody else?
My name is Caroline Thomas, and I live at 5610 Yarrow. And I hate to speak in public. So the fact that I am tells you how important this is to me. We have lived in our home for 16 years next month. It's a modest 1.5 story. We have 3 children, so 5 family, 2 dogs in our house. We have 1 bathroom. And about 12 years ago, we considered moving. Our realtor came and he walked through the house and he said, well, first thing you're going to have to do is paint the walls completely neutral. Second of all, whoever buys this house is just going to scrape it anyway. They're going to buy your house for the location. And I thought, no way. We've stayed in that house. We have preserved most of what needed attention. We're finishing up part of it now. And I can't tell you the number of people who have stopped by our house. They've gotten out, parked to walk into Old Town, and have said, I love your house. This is my favorite house on Yarrow Street. Would you ever consider selling it? We have had people leave notes in our door. We have children at St. Anne's. We would love to live in Old Town. If you ever consider selling, please call us. And I'm not willing to sell. I'm not willing to leave my neighborhood. We have worked to create a neighborhood that is truly like a family. And for the people who are moving in,
Ma'am, if you would direct your comments to council. Thank you.
people who are moving into the neighborhood and they're raising their young families here, we have a few on our block right now, I would like to tell them that they are moving into a neighborhood that will support their family, their children, what they want to do with their homes. We are people who talk. We walk through our neighborhoods. We visit. In doing so, over the last 12 years, we've become a neighborhood that Christmas carols at probably every single person's house in this room. There is support that you won't find in a suburban neighborhood in West Arvada. There's a little give and take to that, and a lot of it comes with courtesy and respect for what you do with your space because we're pretty tight-knit. So I think that the proposed guidelines are an effort to retain not simply the structures, but truly the lifeblood and thread of what is Old Town Arvada. So thank you for considering.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm Michael Smith. I own the property at 5608 Yarrow. I would be Carolyn's neighbor. We bought our property in late 2013. Maybe different than most of the folks here. I wasn't necessarily attracted to the neighborhood. I was attracted to the commercial aspect of Old Town Arvada and being close to the future light rail. We did tear down our house. We worked with an architect for about 2 years to design something. One of the things that we did was we reviewed the Old Town Arvada guidelines. We asked our architect to keep it in mind and to try to get something that would fit within the neighborhood. We finished that up about the same time I became aware of this process, and we put our plan on hold because of the uncertainty. And to date, we've not kicked off anything with the city. We've not progressed our plans to the finalization part, a lot because of the uncertainty. And I'd like to say I'm a little bit indifferent to the guidelines, but I guess since I haven't decided to build yet in Arvada, I'm opposed to them. Although I think that most people who move in and do things with their house would tend to do the right thing, I'm concerned that the guidelines will not allow for improvement of property values. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Young. I live at 7706 Robinson Way. I was born and raised in Arvada when there was no such thing as Old Town. There was only the town. The city limits were Lamar to Carr, Grandview to Allison. I know Reno Park like the back of my hand. And what I'd like to say, if you're going to have a National Historic District, that district is based solely on these contributing structures. In Reno Park, I believe we've gone from 85% of the homes as contributing to 83%. There have been a number of scrapes just in the last 18 months. Without original historic homes, there is no historic district. This is the culture of Arvada. People talk about history as something not living. Reno Park is living history. Those buildings have survived for well over 100 years. They are well built. When maintained, they will stand another 100 years. Many of them are absolutely gorgeous and stunning buildings. It is critical to keep the existing buildings. You can add on to the back. I think Nori Winter and the group has done a wonderful job of identifying ways to increase the size of the property without destroying the historical integrity. History is our roots. It's the base from which we all grow. And having just this little piece, only 4 blocks, of history, I think, is essential to the culture of Arvada. And we need to make sure that there are some restrictions on demolition. Every time one of those buildings falls, the historic district is that much closer to being eliminated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Anyone else? Well, yes. Let's not all try to figure out who gets to have the last word. Let's.
Hi, my name is Kurt Forrestal. I live at 5615 Yarrow Street. I've lived there for 12 years, and I've heard a lot tonight about keeping Old Town old. Well, about 15 years ago, my family and I opened up an ice cream shop in Old Town Arvada on Grandview called What's the Scoop? And that concept of keeping Old Town old is kind of what killed our ice cream shop. Because back then, no one came to Old Town Arvada. Back then, there were 3 dive bars and 1 stationery shop, and that was it. And the surrounding community never came to Old Town. Just because, again, there was nothing there, and the community around just never seemed to venture out into the actual downtown center of Old Town Arvada. So I think the surrounding community, if you brought in, not necessarily new bill, but brought in new money, bringing new money will help revitalize Old Town, which is the last 10 years has blossomed to a really nice place to go down to. But it'll also bring in new minds, and the new mindsets usually demand for new schools and better schooling around the area. You know, just like North Denver, Northwest Denver, 20 years ago, the schooling district out there was terrible. Now it's one of the best in the area because new families bring in new money, and new families have younger kids who demand higher education and better schooling. So if you guys consider not necessarily bringing in new construction, but at least bringing in new ideas in and around Old Town Arvada, it would definitely help out newer and growing families.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, next.
Good evening, Council Mayor. My name is Jeffrey Gardella. I live at 7002 Grandview Avenue, which is in Stocky Walter, not Reno Park, so this is an amicus brief. There have been a lot of changes in Old Town recently, a lot of wonderful changes, the light rail, the perspective of the light rail, and other development, bringing a lot of new people. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of new money coming in. And I think we've turned a corner from where we needed to be goosing things to get new people to come in and develop, and we need to start looking at preserving some of the things we have here that have attracted people up to this point. I think that this process has been very slow and cautious, and the city has taken a lot of care to talk to the people in the community. And I think these design guidelines are a really good compromise. I think without any mandatory guidelines, really you just have a set of wishful thinking, and that too many mandatory guidelines really restrict what can be done and put hampers on people, what they can do with their own property. And I understand that some people have bought properties that really are site constricted, and I think that that's what we have the Board of Adjustments for, and that I would hope that the city would work with them and help them build the house of their dreams on that property, but that we not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Good evening, Mr. DiGiacomo.
Hello, how are you all doing today? Well, you guys have heard me talk on this issue a couple times. My name is Ascenzo DiGiacomo. I live at 12630 West 66th Place in Arvada. I am not in the historic district, of course. I just wanted to mention a couple things tonight, and I hope you had a chance to get my late letter this afternoon.
We did.
Great. I appreciate you guys taking a chance, the opportunity to read that. But one of the things I just want to say, you know, we have a gem in our midst here in Arvada with the Reno Park area. There's not very many cities in Arvada that have, or in the metro area that have that, and I think that's really important for us to note. But one of the main things that I think is important to reiterate here is we're not, the guidelines are not trying to be onerous to the owners and the people that exist in the properties today and their previous families and friends and all the people that lived there before. What we're right now trying to do is create some armament for the spec developers and the spec builders. And believe me, they're going to be here if the guidelines don't at least give them some sort of a restriction and some sort of requirement to do certain things and to have staff look at every particular project in general with regard to the detailed guidelines that are proposed here tonight. So, having been on both sides of the table as an architect and a planner, I understand their desire to get more dollars per square foot out of projects. That's what they're all about. We've had many people come up and talk about, they're here because they love Arvada, they love the scale of the neighborhood and so forth, and they also don't want to see it go to a Highlands type situation where you have 2 or 3 story stucco boxes mixed in, with other historic buildings. These buildings have no porches, they have no roofs, they have 2 or 3 elevations facing the street that have no interest to anybody, and I think that's a shame in those historic neighborhoods. Just another thing with regard to this is we're already starting to see ads. I haven't laid my eyes on it, but I heard today that there was an ad already about a project in a property in Arvada that, it says in the byline, it said, perfect for a scrape. So believe me, Arvada is on the sights and sounds of everybody's radar. I guess that's it. I just want to say I agree with Chip, Mr. Edelstein, if that was a right pronunciation, the Sandovals, Englands, Carolyn, and all the other people that spoke in support of your approval of the guidelines tonight. And just for your information, I'm the 14th person, and that's 9 out of 14 people that support the guidelines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, I'll close the public comment portion. Now it's council's turn to have a discussion. I'll open it up for that discussion. Mr. Pfeiffer.
I'll go ahead and kick us off. Can I get Cheryl just to come up and explain, just so for education for the community, kind of how the waiver process would work? What kind of scenarios would somebody come to for a waiver? I think that seems to be a sticking point in some of the conversation. I think people think everything's very black and white, and I believe, at least the conversation we've had when we did the walking tour, that there was exceptions and you were going to do something around the waivers. So maybe if we can educate the public a little bit more on that process.
Sure. So what staff is proposing is that there would be administrative review for conformance with the mandatory guidelines, and we would offer suggestions if people would like on the advisory guidelines. We would approach it similar to the way we do it in Old Town, where there are different criteria established in the Land Development Code by which a waiver can be made if there are certain findings made, and those can be things such as a very constricted lot that we have heard about tonight. It might be something like a structure that has a very short sidewall, things of that nature, so that we would take into consideration the particular constraints of a particular piece of property and see if there needed to be some modifications of those guidelines. That would be, again, an administrative process. So the waivers and the decisions on the certificates of compliance with the guidelines would be done by the community development director.
Okay, and so, specifically, we were talking about the gentleman at 7799 57th House. I mean, in fact, I think I asked you that question while we were standing in front of their house, because he has a unique ridge line that faces the south. But if he wanted to do some of the things he said he wanted to do, he could come through a waiver process.
Right, and I think we presented a scenario on a very similar property at the last workshop, which showed things that could be done under the proposed guidelines and where things could be done with a waiver that could still ultimately allow some good construction on that property.
Yeah, so the way I would understand everything is, hey, just come and talk to us and we'll work through the process and go from there.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? Mark McGough?
Yes, thank you. Yes, a question or a clarification from you, Cheryl. It's my understanding from looking into this a little while back that in terms of the two-story houses, that there are 3 current contributing two-story houses, and given that two-story houses can be constructed in context within the neighborhood, that there could be 8 more with the guidelines if they are adopted as written. Is that right or approximately right?
I believe those numbers are correct. And again, that would assume that we're not granting any waivers. There may be situations where a waiver might allow for additional two-story construction.
So there could be more with waivers.
That's possible,
I think
yes.
those were the numbers that I'd gained a few months ago. Okay, I think that's the only question I have at this point.
Nancy Ford.
I was going to make a motion if there were no other questions.
I'm not seeing any other questions.
I'm ready.
I move that CB 17-037, an ordinance adopting the design guidelines for the Reno Park Addition Historic District, be approved on final reading, numbered 4615, and ordered published by title only.
Okay, we have a motion, and Mr. Marriott?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I would like to propose a friendly amendment, Ms. Ford, to your motion. And this is I got my crayons out earlier and drew some pictures. So I'm going to come down to the podium so we can put it up on the overhead. And I'd like to give you a brief description of why, and then you can decide whether you'd like a friendly amendment or whether you'd like the amendment to be voted on. So I'll head down.
This is a first, I think. I don't remember in a long time where we've had a council member go down to be able to use the overhead system.
Okay, well, thank you for indulging me, Mayor and fellow council members. So I have stayed up at night being awake, thinking about all these things. And one of the things I've become very concerned with is some of the unintended consequences of possibly passing these design guidelines as are. And there's a number of them, and I'm not going to propose anything that addresses all of them tonight. But there was one that kind of stuck out to me, and that was, it's on page 99 of the report, and it's under 4.8, and it's the bullet points, and it's the part of the good design guidelines that regulate new construction only, so not a remodel, but new construction only, and restrict the width to 28 feet only. And the thing that gave me pause was in our last workshop, I was, of course, for a scenario where we allowed 2 stories. In this particular case, where we are not going to allow 2 stories, I'm not going to try to take another bite at that apple, but I believe any of the new construction that happens in Old Town Arvada or in the Reno Park Historic District is going to be most likely 1.5 stories. And so I think there's a conflict or an unintended consequence in that particular design guideline. So I got out some crayons and drew a couple pictures of various roof pitches on a 28-foot width. And so this first one shows at a 412 roof pitch, so 4 feet of rise with 12 feet of run, that it yields a potential upstairs room of only 4 feet. Nobody's going to do that. I will do that. I'm going to take it off here. Nobody would do that, so I'm going to take that one out of there. The next kind of common roof pitch is a 612 roof pitch. And so a 612 roof pitch on a 28-foot wide building with the defined 4-foot sidewall for a 1.5 story construction could yield a room and a clear area upstairs of about 12 feet. So this is what gives me heartburn. I think this is too small to yield a useful bedroom. So a useful bedroom will generally have a closet, and you're not going to put it at the end because that's where your window is going to be. And so you're going to lose some space off the side. You're going to essentially end up with a bedroom that's 10 feet wide or less. If we make one small change, which is to change that restriction on the width from 28 feet to 30 feet, 2 feet, only 2 feet, this 12-foot wide room with a 612 roof pitch becomes 14 feet wide, which becomes a usable bedroom. And so that's the difference, is there's a breakover point at which a space is more usable than not. So that's what it looks like with a 612 pitch. I'll note that the height of the peak is 21 feet on this one. So moving on to a 812 roof pitch yields a room of about 15.5 feet width, which gives you sufficient space, and I think this is what we're likely to see. The problem is you start getting much taller houses with these steeper roof pitches, and I would like to make sure that anybody who elects to build a new house has the flexibility to choose a roof pitch that works for them. Moving on, there's a 10-foot roof pitch. The peak of the house becomes 25.5 feet. And then lastly, a 1212 roof pitch yields a peak of the roof of 28 feet in a 20-foot wide room. I would prefer if new houses were maybe not built with quite that much roof pitch because the houses get so tall. And I think what we've got with these numbers that, near as I can tell, are somewhat arbitrary, we've got a favoritism towards those much higher roof pitches which yield taller houses. Now, why does this make a difference? Well, within the design guidelines, there are statements about preserving solar access and backyard privacy. So the more you restrict the width of the building, the longer it has to be to become the size that probably somebody would like to build. If you allow a little more width, the building can be a little bit shorter, which takes a small step, but I think, again, it adds some flexibility and a small step towards allowing a bit more backyard privacy and solar access to the houses around it. So that's it. It's kind of fairly simple. I just think that those numbers of width if we can expand them just a little bit, give somebody who's trying to build a house more flexibility, more choices of what they do, of both roof pitch, house length, house width. They don't have to build it that wide. They could build it narrower, and also may yield anywhere where there is new construction some housing where each new construction doesn't look exactly the same. So here is my proposed amendment, which would be to direct the staff to make within the design guidelines 3 changes. It's on page 99, it's under 4.8, second bullet point down, and it simply states that front building width for lots less than or equal to 50 foot wide, the front wall length would be 30 feet instead of 28 feet max, before a 4-foot minimum offset with a total building width of max 32 feet as opposed to 30 feet. So just allowing 2 more feet of width both in the front and after an offset if you chose to build with an offset. The second one down is for lots greater than 50 feet wide, the front wall length would be 30 feet as opposed to 28 feet before a 4-foot minimum offset with a total building width max of 35 feet. So no changes to the maximum width you could do on a wider lot, but just allowing the front of the building to be a little wider so you can potentially have a usable bedroom upstairs in the 1.5 story and have, without having a very steep roof pitch. So anyway, that's it.
Yeah, we can, sure. Let's have questions for clarification as to Mr. Marriott's proposed. And why don't you come on back up? Unless there's something, are you going to need him to do anything with this?
No.
Yeah, why don't you come on back up, and we'll ask clarifying questions as to your proposed amendment, and then Ms. Ford can decide whether or not she wishes to accept it as a friendly amendment or vote on it separately.
No, it's actually, I'm not a construction guy. I'm a ones and zero techie guy. So I don't even know if you can find that kind of paper anymore. So good job. It's called computers now. But
I used a crayon.
You did a good job. Just to be really clear, this is on new construction builds, not on existing where they're trying to put a new facade on or anything like that.
Exactly. You know, if you were going to take a 1-story house and add a half story on top of it, you're restricted to the existing width of the building.
Right.
So this applies to new construction only, does not apply to existing construction or remodel. That's already fixed by what's there.
And my second question is on the roof pitches. You know, I'm not that smart with that kind of the angles. I guess geometry was not my thing. But does our design guides allow the, I think you called it the 12 by 12 roof or whatever?
12 pitch,
12 pitch.
So within the design guidelines, there are no restrictions on roof pitches at all. So there's a restriction on the width of the building, but roof pitches are free. Now, it would have been possible to write this where the roof pitches had to be within a certain range and the width of the building was flexible, you know, to be controlled by the setbacks on the lot. That could have been done that way, but it wasn't. And rather than, you know, trying to rewrite the whole thing, this was just a way to look at allowing a lower roof pitch and a usable room at the same time.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
One comment there. The guidelines do have a restriction on roof pitch, and it's going the other direction. So basically, it's saying 612 or higher is what's customarily seen in the neighborhood, and so you keep it 612 or higher unless you have a lower roof pitch already historically.
So it would be a 612, 812, all
would be
the way
all
up.
allowed, right?
All allowed.
So
okay.
what you wouldn't see would be a 412 or a flat roof.
Yeah, because we don't want flat roofs.
But there's no restriction on a 12-12 pitch. Now,
Okay.
I can tell you if you're going to build a house, you're probably somewhat averse to building a house with a 12-12 pitch for a couple reasons. One, it gets a lot more expensive because of the amount of roof area and material that it takes, number one. Number two, you end up with a bunch of space way up in a peak, way up high. So that's a kind of a disadvantage. And the extra cost to do that, you know, to construct or roof a 12-12 pitch, that's a pitch you can't walk on. So it takes climbing gear to walk around on that. And so I think that somebody building a new house would most likely try to avoid a 12-12 pitch. But I think if faced with a usable bedroom size or a 12-12 pitch, and they're picking the best option or the least problem, they probably default to a steeper pitched roof to gain more space, because that seems to be the issue. Keep in mind in this area, you know, what controls there is controls via zoning, which is the setback, side and front and back, and then also a maximum lot coverage. So you can only cover 40% of the lot. So if a building is narrow and you want to cover as much, you know, build as big a house as you can, and it's narrow, the way you cover 40% of the lot is you make that house very long. So it probably goes from forward all the way to the back, and you make a long, narrow house. If you can build it a little wider, it can be a little shorter. And so, again, this is a very small change. I debated over and over and over again about how much to suggest making a change here. And I came down to the smallest change I thought I could make that would yield usable bedroom space in a 1.5-story house with a relatively low roof pitch. In other words, could have added 4 feet to the width of a house, and then it would help solve some of those other problems, but then it would start causing problems of encroaching on your neighbors and looking out of scale. So, you know, it's my stab at kind of a compromise or fixing what's kept me up at night, which is some of the unintended consequences that may be present in these design guidelines. I mean, you know, until they're implemented and we see it, we don't know, but that small change to me visually doesn't seem to make almost any difference, but yet does have a demonstrative effect because you can have a lower roof pitch.
Mr. Jones, did you have a clarifying question of Mr. Marriott?
Well, I have one question for Cheryl. Does this impact the conforming versus non-conforming question?
No, it has no bearing on, it's contributing versus
Or
non-contributing.
that's what I meant.
Yeah, and no, he's speaking strictly about new construction, so it would have nothing to do with that.
Okay. So now my question for Mr. Marriott. So, and I just want to make sure I understand the front length, currently the way it's written is 28 feet max before a 4-foot setback. So I'm looking at the drawing in figure D here.
Mm-hmm.
So you're suggesting that by adding 2 feet to that maximum front wall will allow for a bigger usable room in that 1.5-story new build?
Yeah, at a lower roof pitch. So at a 28-foot wide building, you can certainly get a usable bedroom, as those crayon drawings showed you. You just get it by having a very steep roof pitch. And so you know, these design guidelines are a big bunch of balances that we're trying to achieve here. One of them is scale and not impeding on neighbors, and so height is one of those things. So trying to create an environment where someone can choose to not build any higher than they have to, I think adds to the situation or is positive.
Okay, thank you.
One point I want to make on Mr. Marriott's proposal before Ms. Ford decides whether or not to accept it as a friendly amendment is that I kind of like the 2-foot versus, you know, your concept of a 4-foot, because I don't want to create an incentive for scrape-offs, which if we're giving permission on new builds that can go to a wider front, that's an incentive to do that, and for a 2-foot wider, I don't think people are going to say, okay, I'm going to do a scrape-off versus.
Right, and so that was generally my philosophy as I looked at this. I drew, I don't know, 30 or 40 pictures with all different dimensions.
Thank you for not bringing all those.
I didn't bring them all. Looking at what the possibilities might be, and tried to default to what was the minimum expansion of width that would allow the biggest bang for the buck, which is the usable size room at the lowest roof pitch, and I think 2 does it. I mean, you know, time will tell if those are right, but to me this appears to be an improvement on the situation. May not be ultimately the best thing, but I don't think this hurts anything or anybody.
Okay, Mr. McGough.
And yes, I'd like to speak just to the uncertainty mentioned in Mr. Marriott's last comments to say, well, we're not sure, but we don't think this will do any damage. I'm wondering whether there might be value in just having this question reviewed by staff and brought back to us with a recommendation at a future time rather than us trying to make an engineering and design decision along with the design guidelines this evening.
Okay, so Ms. Ford, what's your decision? Are you accepting the?
I'm wondering, well, it makes sense, but I'm wondering, could we ask our consultant his opinion?
You certainly have the right to do that.
Mr. Winter?
I will say that the dimensions that were recommended are based on our taking measurements along the street, and that those were the traditional widths that were seen. But I think that Mr. Marriott has some good suggestions here in terms of the proportions of an upper floor, the usability of the upper floor that could be yielded. And I think I appreciate the sensitivity to limiting it to only 2 feet. I think beyond that would be a bridge too far. But I think this would work.
Okay, Ms. Ford, you're in the driver's seat as to temporarily you're in the driver's seat as to accept the amendment as friendly, or we'll be putting it to a vote.
Well, I certainly appreciate Mr. Marriott's weighing this a lot, because I appreciate the fact that you care that much. And I have to say that I have to admit that for me, it's very difficult to follow a lot of what you're saying, since I've never even built a house or look at these things that way. But it gives me great comfort when our consultant agrees with you, and so therefore I'm very comfortable in accepting your amendment.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor for approval of the design guidelines, which contain both mandatory and advisory, as amended by Mr. Marriott's proposal to add 2 feet to the dimensions as set forth. If you may vote. Does anybody wish to speak to the motion before voting? Dot Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Devon for putting this softball question as my first council meeting. I appreciate it. So I have lots of notes, and I just want everybody to know that this is not my first night looking at this. I did sit here all summer long and listen to public testimony, and it's hard. Even right now, I'm not sure which way I'm going to vote in about 5 minutes. But I would like to say that it's hard for me as a property owner to put guidelines on somebody that bought a property in a location before there were guidelines. So I understand guidelines, and I love Old Town. I tried very hard to buy a house in Old Town because I love what it looks like. And I'm nervous that if you put guidelines on a house and somebody can't build the addition that they want, that they would scrape it and build new. And then, as Ms. Young suggested, the historic nature of that Old Town goes away. So I just want to say that I think I may vote no to this because of that. But I do know that you want guidelines, but it seems like the people that live in the neighborhood can't agree on what the guidelines look like. You know, of the 14, 11 of you lived there, and it was pretty split. So that's what I'd like to say to this. I don't take this decision lightly.
Okay, Mr. Jones.
This is a hard question, and I would agree that personal property rights are key and critical for all of us, but I go back to in the staff report, or the public hearing staff report, where it says in 2014, city received a petition from nearly 85% of the property owners in Reno Park Historic District stating they supported preserving the historic character of the district. And I think in 2014, that was the reality, was that that was the big question, was ensuring that the preservation of that historic nature, the historic feel of these few blocks was restored, or not restored, but kept. And then it became evident that, well, gosh, that doesn't solve all of our problems. We need to make sure that, that we look at the way that it looks and feels today so that we don't lose that. I had an opportunity to walk those streets with Miss Young, and she gave me her insight and her, and the history of those streets. Then again had the opportunity to walk the streets again with Ms. Drake, and again to see this neighborhood from a different perspective, and from someone who's lived in the general area and saw this family's home. I can't remember your last name, I apologize. So I saw lots and lots of different things, but the reality is that we've been asked as a body of government to make a decision on property rights, and that's always a hard decision to make. But I think the right decision is to support the guidelines, and I'll be supporting those guidelines tonight.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll say for my first night it was fire sprinklers, residential fire sprinklers. So there is a tradition here.
We believe in
softball pitches there.
Yeah.
I'll never
baptism
forget
by
that.
fire, so to speak.
And Mr. Devon was new too, and he threw that one at me. But I think it's equally emotional because I remember going through this whole process from 2014 to tonight, and I challenged, is this what you wanted? And I think I've said that several times, and I have to say that at least the community has stuck together and maybe divided on certain topics or certain words or certain items within the guidelines. But for the most part, there is a passion to keep that community together. I will say for the young lady at 5610 Yarrow, I don't know where she is. Did she stay? So I talked to your husband on the porch for hours one time. In fact, this was probably, I don't know when it was, maybe 2011, or I don't know when you were there, but I sat there and talked to you guys because I loved your house and your porch, and then I got inside, and then I never knocked on another door because I was always at their house. But we talked for a long time, and I remember that day. I also want to thank staff and taking us on that walking tour. I think that was important for us. I mean, we all live here, but when you get out of your car and actually walk every house and talk about every house and look at the good, the bad, the ugly, I think it helps. But I also agree that I don't like government always telling you what you can do on your property or not. But like I said last time, I will be supporting these guidelines because this is where we needed to land, and this is a very long and thoughtful discussion. I mean, we're looking at 3-4 years now doing this long emotional trip, and we just need to get to that resolution. So I will be supporting the motion tonight.
Mr. McGough.
Yes, and thank you. I too have had the concerns about the individual property rights versus any collective property rights there might be for the neighborhood, and I guess that could be examined at much greater length and not decided conclusively by us. So I really want to take a look at not the property rights, but what we want to preserve in our city and what we want the city to look like at some time in the future. And I would favor strongly the preservation of the mass, the scale, proportion of Reno Park neighborhood as it is now. And if there should be a scrape and rebuilding, we're still talking about mass, scale, proportion, layout on the lot, setbacks, etc., so that it still would not be outsized and disproportionate with everything else in the neighborhood. I like the idea that it would not be unlimited two-story houses, and as was mentioned, it's once we get to 2 stories, it's conceivable to go pretty high beyond that, since our building height limit is 35 feet. There could be 2.5 stories, perhaps even fitting in a 3-story building there. I don't think that's not what I see as the future of our historic area of Arvada. And so I will be supporting the guidelines and voting in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Mr. Marriott, you're next.
Thank you. So when we started this process, I looked at and viewed City Council's role here as facilitation within the property owners within the Reno Park Historic District to help them come up with design guidelines. My hope is that there would have been really broad consensus. There clearly isn't, but I think you can't get any closer than this has gotten. Like the example I just gave you, I have other parts of the design guidelines that I can pick away at it, little details that give me a bit of heartburn that we're doing something that's going to cause some unintended consequences. But we're faced with accepting these design guidelines that we've spent a very long time and a very much amount of effort from the city staff, the consultant, the city council, and the neighbors, you folks. And I think compared to the option of voting no and having there be no design guidelines and it being a free-for-all, that looks to me like a worse outcome. So because of that, I'm going to vote yes, and I will be supporting this. And I want to thank my fellow council members for indulging me and letting me bring my crayon drawings up there and looking at that with an open mind and letting me pick out the one thing that was keeping me awake the most. So thank you.
Okay. Ms. Ford?
Well, it gives me great pleasure to know that you will get more sleep now.
I think tonight may require some NyQuil, though, with the cold that Mr. Marriott's got.
I just wanted to clarify, too, before this audience and those that are looking at this broadcast, that I, too, for me, it is not easy for having government dictate. I am a strong proponent of property rights, but I also think that this is a wonderful approach. It's been a good approach, and I do like the comment that the gentleman made about the days when people did help one another, and I hope that that's true of today, because I think I'm a very strong proponent of loving one's neighbor and taking care of one's neighbor and thinking about one's neighbor when we do things with our houses, with our actions, whatever it may be. It's a very strong value for me, and while it's one that I can't impose on others, I would just strongly encourage that our city continue to think that way, because I do believe that when neighbors are strong, you do have a better society, and it's a happier society, I think. So I really do want to thank my fellow council members who are supporting this, and I thank you all for the work that you put into it. It was an arduous process, but I think it's a good one and will have good results.
Very good.
Sleep well, Mr. Marriott.
Finally, I get the last word. So this one is a tough one, without question. I think we are in unanimity of what we don't want. We don't want the 3-story flat roof square structures that we see in North Denver and elsewhere. We absolutely know that this is not the right neighborhood for that. I think there's been some flexibility amongst us as to what short of that can we tolerate or do we want to see. I found it a little bit amusing with the email we all got today of the fear tactic of the scrape-offs. And frankly, and I don't know if it's one of your homes, and if it is, I apologize, but I got to tell you, that house that they're talking about for a scrape-off would be much better scraped off and something that was more compatible with the neighborhood was built in there. I mean, that house is a non-contributor from my perspective, and a scrape-off would be better. That being said, the concept that Mr. Marriott has put forward to us tonight that gives greater flexibility for 1.5-story homes, as someone who supported 2-story, I can live with that, particularly as long as the waiver language is there for individuals who do have unique lots, that do have unique architecture already, the A-frames and such, that there is a process that they can go through. And as such, in spite of my Puritan personal property rights mentality, I will accept that this is a good compromise, a good solution, and one that deserves to be supported. I appreciate the work of the neighborhood, the consultants, and particularly staff. I think it may be a long time before we consider design guidelines for ever again.
Thank goodness we only have 4 historic areas.
That's right, that's right. So, Ms. Miller, you've now had the opportunity to hear from all of us. You need to cast your vote. Okay, all votes are cast. And it passes 6-1, Ms. Miller voting no, all others voting yes. Now we can have staff go forward and see what comes of it. So thank you all for being here and for your considerate and thoughtful comments. And I do urge the neighborhood to continue to work together and not let this become divisive. Okay, that concludes our public hearings for tonight. We do now have an opportunity for public comment, if anyone wishes to address council at this time on some other matter. Seeing none, I'll move on to council reports. Ms. Ford, you're first.
I have, well, I have not really been reporting much on the Arvada Sustainability Advisory Committee, but tonight I wanted to pass out a paper that the committee is using to educate our citizens, to help them to understand this very complex issue of waste hauling. And I believe there were new rates put out, but I just wanted to mention this fact that's identified on this sheet, looking at residential recycling rates and comparing to Arvada. The highest rate that's on this sheet, and I'm assuming it's highest in Colorado, would be Loveland at 61% versus Arvada at 13%. So, and there's more facts. So I'm very proud that they're doing a big study of this right now. They've been polling folks at different events, and they're looking to talk to neighborhood groups, and so they're working hard on this issue. I also wanted to just mention that Mr. McGough and I were invited, well, we were all, I guess, invited, but we were fortunate to observe Foster Elementary, a 3rd grade at Foster Elementary, and I just wanted to report that it was a wonderful experience. I really enjoyed it. The kids were very enthusiastic. I was I knew that Foster was a bilingual school, but I thought it was very, very interesting that everything was taught in Spanish, and I was kind of envious of that since I didn't have that growing up, and it would be a wonderful skill to have today. So, and then I just wanted to make one comment that the mayor and I sat together last Friday night to see Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I watched the mayor a little bit throughout that performance, and I think there was a little bit of envy when Joseph came out in his wonderful coat of colors. But we had a great time. It was a wonderful production at the Arvada Center, so I really encourage everyone to try that, to see it if they can. It's selling quite quickly. And then, I'm sorry that I don't have the exact dates, but I know that the fine arts market is coming to the Arvada Center soon, and that's a great opportunity to buy gifts for your sweetheart or others.
Ms. Ford is quite accurate. I was envious of Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat. I may have some good ones, but not quite that good. Mr. McGough?
Yes, thank you. I just was going to add on the Foster Elementary presentation, the kids presented, they acted as a city council, and they were exploring the question of should Amazon locate within the city of Arvada. And so these kids, third graders, were bringing up issues that would need to be considered should Amazon want to locate within the city boundaries of Arvada. So watch out for these kids. They're exploring deeply important issues at Foster Elementary.
Right.
And they're doing it bilingually.
Great. Mr. Pfeiffer?
Yeah, I just want to keep the council apprised of the debate at DRCOG, Denver Regional Council of Governments, on the sub-region split of money. We will continue that debate on mid-December, which whoever my alternate is might have to go to that debate. But basically, the question is about $290 million. And should it be 70-30 split, 80-20, 90-10 split with the region, which would be county-based, and then if it was 70%, then that money would stay within the county, and not necessarily county as in Jefferson County, but the representatives within the county would decide what projects those would be applied to within the county. That does have impacts because then we do not compete necessarily against Arapahoe County and other like Denver for larger dollar projects. I would like, if there's any discussion within council, some feedback on what we feel would be best on a split when you have an opportunity, and I'll be more than happy to go over that in more detail, what that means to us. But we're going to be one of the first, other than the Puget Sound area up in Seattle, we'll be one of the only ones doing this regional split. I'll tell you personally, I think from knowing where DRCOG sits and what we do, I think a 70-30 is probably pushing it with a Federal Highway administration on that. But there is a large push to get it higher than that. So if there's any feedback that my peers would like to give me, I would represent whatever is best.
Can I ask you a quick question? When you talk about 70-30, are you talking about 70% municipalities, 30% counties?
County. No, it's 30% would stay with DRCOG, and 70% would go to the sub-region. Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
And you'd compete.
Yeah, and then the 30% would be like the I-70 Central projects that's happening there, the big stuff. But then the debate becomes what is considered region and sub-regional, because you might go into Adams County, and then what does that happen? And who fixes the road issues between two counties, and how does that get scored? So that you get into a rabbit hole that gets way deep. Yeah. But it is a real healthy debate right now, and I'd like to make sure I'm representing how we feel as a community. I'd like to get more feedback from staff on that. So if you want to go grab lunch or talk on the phone.
I can't tell you how lucky I feel to have you on that.
It's only taken me 4 or 5 years to figure this out, but
yeah,
I could hear Maria from here. So,
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to give a quick update on the Jefferson Parkway Public Highway Authority. This last week, we, as a group, approved a slate of 12 volunteers to serve on the Jefferson Parkway Advisory Committee. These are all citizens with respect to Candelas and Leiden Rock and the surrounding areas, and even one from Littleton who is a user or a potential user of the roadway. And these folks will meet once a month for the next 9 months to help, to be a sounding board, to give us input, to give us feedback, and to help us ensure that those things that need to be communicated to the citizenry are communicated effectively, and we're going to use them to their fullest extent. And then I just wanted to remind council that I will be out of town next Monday, and so I'm hoping that you will excuse me.
We'll think about it. On a serious note, we note with sadness the passing of a really good Arvada citizen, Eldon Leidig, who passed away this weekend. Eldon was a huge champion for the Chamber of Commerce, was a champion for the Two Ponds Refuge, was very involved with the Arvada Center for years and years and years as a benefactor. Was a cherished member of our business community who would be in attendance at virtually every Chamber of Commerce and other type of charity event in our community. So I do want to note his passing and know that many of us were very touched by his life. He was a great asset for our community. Also, as we approach the week of Thanksgiving, for those who are traveling either near or far, let them be safe. Let us enjoy our times with our families, our friends, and that we remember what the spirit of Thanksgiving is, and that we all give thanks for what an incredible country and what an incredible community that we live in and participate in. So with that, Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Next Monday, our workshop will include the Arvada Center Master Plan update. We are going to bring you information around metro districts. I'm sorry that Councilmember Jones will miss that because you are one of the inspirations to bringing that workshop in front of you, but we'll be glad to sit down with you later when you get back. And then also update on traffic safety.
Which is another big one for him as well.
Right,
so.
well, yes, for all of you.
For all of us.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
It'll be 9 a.m. where I am when you're meeting.
Oh.
So I'm more than happy to conference call in if needed.
Mr. Daly, we stand adjourned. Thank you all. Good work tonight.